Hello again. We're going to be talking in this video about flourishing and education. More specifically, the relationship between the two. What does your education have to do with your flourishing in your life? And what does flourishing have to do with education and learning in the first place? So we'll start off with the first term here, flourishing. It's related to this concept of the good life. And when I say good here, I don't mean it in the superficial or everyday sense of the term. I mean it in the technical, philosophical sense of the term. The contrast here is probably best put between things that just make you happy in the sense of just enjoying them and things that have a bit more depth to them. So for example, I might set aside 4 or 5 hours to play Call of Duty, or let's say 6 just for fun, which is a video game. That might make me happy, but that activity probably doesn't have a lot of depth, and after 6 hours of video games you don't feel very good. I wouldn't attribute this then as a characteristic of the good life. On the other hand, if you looked at fatherhood, for example, or having a good career that you're excited about, those things can make you happy in the same way video games can, but they also have more depth to them. They're longer term and arguably more meaningful. So this notion of flourishing is in effect that state of doing things that you think are worthwhile. In ancient Greek they called it eudaimonia, which is these fancy words here. Usually when I talk about this, I'm thinking about Aristotle, who was an ancient Greek philosopher. We hear about this from many different philosophical traditions all over the world. In fact, if you look at Confucius in Asia, it goes much further back. I tend to think of Aristotle's book Nicomachean Ethics when I think of the good life and flourishing. But the thing that's important for our purposes today is the connection between these questions, what constitutes living a good life and flourishing, and your experience at KPU today. Over the course of intellectual history, there have been many answers that have come and gone, ebbed and flowed, but the takeaway is that today the question's still pretty open. We've got some interesting ideas about it and lots of great scholars thinking about it, but at the end of the day, you still need to come up with your own answer. Aristotle thought, for example, that certain forms of activity might be candidates as requirements for the good life. In this case, having a job that's fulfilling and interesting and motivating might be a key part of your good life. It might also be the case that moral character or virtue are required, that bad people who lie or cheat or feel racism, for example, might live in such tension and anger that they couldn't live a good life. Some people argue that money does the same thing, that you need a certain amount of wealth to do the things that constitute good living. Perhaps you need to be healthy. We certainly all have met people who are suffering and ill so much that they can't really live well. On the other hand, it might be the case that you need certain wisdom or intelligence to live a good life. Again, the point here is that the question is pretty open. This is why in countries like Canada, we, at least in theory, attempt to preserve space in which persons can come up with their own answer about what constitutes good living. We usually refer to this as a form of freedom, or liberty. And liberty is a good term to use in this case. We find it important, at least in political theory, to preserve the space in which people can decide which of these things and in what amount are required to live well. So it tends to be the case that today, when people talk about living well, this concept is irrevocably tied up with notions of liberty, which is why Canada has the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, for example, which enshrines protection for all forms of diversity, sexual diversity, religious diversity, or ethnic diversity. This means that Canada is, at least theoretically, a liberal state, that is, a state based on this principle of protecting individual liberty. Now, you'd get better detail from a political philosophy course, but for our purposes, this will do. Because it turns out you need to know certain things and know how to do certain things or think in certain ways to live well. That is, that there is an art of living well, an art of exercising your liberty, which is where we get today's term, liberal arts, which is where we get the name for the degree, a Bachelor of Arts, which is in effect a bachelor's degree in the art of living free. And, it should be noted, respecting the right of others to do so as well. So, part of what we're looking at today is this really interesting link between what you learn and how you think and what you know, and your good life and the good lives of others. That is to say, what you need to learn to live well. That, it certainly seems, is praiseworthy.